I'm Ron Strickland. This webcast is one of a series in which I am providing some brief lectures and commentaries on topics from the courses I teach in literature and cultural studies. This particular episode is the first in a series about John Milton and his epic poem, Paradise Lost. Here I'm going to say some things about Milton's family background, his education, and his political commitments and involvements in the English Revolution, the turbulent political events of the 17th century. I'm especially interested in pointing out some of the ways that Milton is an early exemplar of the concepts of humanism, rationalism, and individualism that have come to define our long epoch of modernity. I'll say first that Milton is especially interesting for me to teach in relation to the overarching theme that I have in mind for this course, which is the trajectory from pre-modern, feudal, medieval modes of human subjectivity through to modern and late modern subjectivity, the experience of being human, one's possible lived experience in a very hierarchical, very stratified society, a society in which one's individual choices are very much constrained, and increasingly the beginnings of mercantile capitalism and eventually industrial capitalism into 20th century modernity. More emphasis is placed on individualism, on individual choice, on autonomy, and among the factors producing this change, we would include the emergence of capitalism, democratic and republican forms of government, the Protestant Reformation, spread of literacy, urbanization, the ways of life that are different, the possibility of human experience and social experience that become both required and also enabled by the massing of populations in cities instead of dispersing populations in small villages and rural communities. So I'll begin there with just pointing out that John Milton, his life, his experience was city life, such as it was in London in the early 17th century. So Milton was born in London in 1608 and he died in 1674. So his lifetime overlapped slightly with that of Shakespeare. And Milton's father, who was also called John Milton, he was a wealthy scrivener. Scriveners perform some of the services that lawyers perform now, solicitors in England perform. They do transcriptions, they serve as notary publics, they help people prepare wills, last wills and testaments, other kinds of documents related to the legal profession, related to the court system. It was an important kind of business at a time when there was an explosion in commercial activity. So there was much greater need for contracts and much greater need for translations and transcriptions of legal documents than there would have been 200 years before, for example. So Milton's father was a self-made man in this context, but he had been disinherited by his own father, this John Milton, the poet's grandfather, because he converted to Protestantism from the Catholic faith. And Protestantism in England at this time had a connection with radical politics. The transformation of England from a Roman Catholic country to a Protestant country began in an act of political contingency that had some consequences that must have been unforeseen. In the 1530s, Henry VIII needed to have a male heir to the throne in order to ensure the continuation of his dynasty. His queen, Catherine of Aragon, had had several miscarriages and a daughter, but she had yet to produce a male heir. Henry petitioned the Pope to have a divorce or an annulment. Divorces were illegal, but in certain cases exceptions were made. In this case, however, for political reasons, the Pope could not grant Henry an annulment. So Henry declared himself the head of the church in England, and along with his archbishop, devised a plan and a justification for setting his first wife aside. He then married Anne Boleyn. She produced another daughter, and Henry went through a succession of wives until he finally got his male heir to the throne. That was Edward VI, and Edward VI became king at 9 years old upon his father's death. Henry dies. Edward VI, after a few years, dies at 16 years old after playing tennis and catching a cough. His sister Mary becomes the queen. She becomes Bloody Mary because her reign is so intolerant toward Protestants. Then she dies, and the country is in crisis. There are some factions of the aristocracy who want to continue with another Catholic monarch, and some who see this as the chance to restore Protestantism as the official religion of the country. And Elizabeth becomes queen. She established the Elizabethan settlement, according to which England was going to be a Protestant country, but Catholics weren't going to be persecuted, at least not horribly. So it has the issue of whether you're an Anglican or a Roman Catholic has these political implications. That's why it's meaningful that John Milton's grandfather disowned John Milton's father, because John Milton's father became a Protestant. Now, I should say, by Milton's time, there's a kind of a high Anglicanism that's the official Anglican religion, and then there are splinter groups. In addition to the Anglican Church, there were other Protestant sects and splinter groups, such as the Presbyterians, the Puritans, Quakers, Levelers, and Diggers. Some of these were quite radical politically. For example, Levelers and Diggers found no biblical justification for property ownership and the social class hierarchy. Diggers squatted on aristocratic lands and planted their crops, attempting to live off the land as, in their view, God had intended.
Presbyterians were not quite so radical. They considered all believers to be equal before God, so they rejected the notion that the king was God's divine representative on earth. They opposed the linking of church and state, and they favored a decentralized form of church government. Well, Milton was not a leveler nor a digger, nor even a Presbyterian, but he was a radical, revolutionary Protestant, and he played an important role in the English Revolution of the 1640s and 50s. I'll turn to that period of Milton's life in my next video.
But for now, I'll conclude this episode. As always, if you have questions or comments, send me an email.